They say a man only dies once. Julius Caesar died 100 times before the first blade ever touched his skin. In our whispered meetings, in the ink of our secret letters, in the nights where men like me weighed one life against a republic, people imagine the Ides of March as a single instant, daggers flashing, a great man falling. For me, it began with a sound, sandals on marble. I remember the echo of his footsteps in the Curia of Pompey, steady and unhurried, the way only a man certain of his own power walks. Sunlight poured through the high windows. Senators rose around him like a white sea. And there I was in that sea, my face calm, my hand wrapped around cold iron, under my toga. Up close, he looked mortal. The same man whose face was stamped on our coins, whose statue stood beside the gods. And yet I saw the lines at his eyes, the stiffness in his step. Even the men we turn into symbols are still just flesh, and flesh can be cut. In minutes he would be lying at the base of Pompey's statue, his blood soaking the floor. As he took his seat and the chamber fell quiet, I asked myself one last time, are we about to save Rome or destroy it? I watched Lucius Tullius Cimber step forward with his petition. That was how the end of Julius Caesar truly began. By 44 BC, Caesar towered over Rome. He was consul, dictator, and Pontifex Maximus, our chief priest, all at once. Then the Senate, half terrified and half dazzled, granted him something unheard of, dictator perpetuo, dictator for life. A dictator was meant to be a temporary weapon, unsheathed only in crisis. Turning that into a permanent command broke with centuries of practice and shook the foundations of the Republic. For a Roman, it sounded less like an office and more like a crown. In those years, he controlled almost everything. The Senate's agenda, elections, the provinces and their armies. The Senate swelled with men who owed everything to him. Veterans were settled on land, provinces were reorganized, new campaigns, including one against Parthia, were being planned. His portrait appeared on coins during his lifetime, a privilege once reserved for gods and Eastern kings. Statues of him stood in sacred places. His person was treated as almost divine. To the people and soldiers, this meant order after civil war. To many of us, it meant the Republic in name only. We had traded chaos for calm by putting almost all power in one pair of hands. I remember the Lupercalia that February. Mark Antony, drunk on loyalty and spectacle, held up a diadem, a symbol of kingship, and offered it to Caesar. Twice he did it. Twice Caesar refused, letting the crowd see him push the crown away. The people roared with relief. But we heard something else. How close Rome had come to calling a king by another name. A crowd can cheer a refusal and still grow used to the idea. Some of us decided that if Caesar would not step back, someone would have to push him. The decision grew in whispers. Cassius was the sharpest tongue among us, a hardened commander who had once fought against Caesar at Pharsalus. Brutus came from a family tied to the expulsion of kings and the birth of the Republic. Decimus Brutus Albinus was one of Caesar's closest generals, trusted with his armies. I was one of roughly 60 senators who met quietly in private houses, in gardens, anywhere Caesar's eyes and ears did not reach. Rome swarmed with his supporters and informers. Freedom, we discovered, often begins as a secret shared between frightened men. Our motives were mixed. Some believed Caesar's perpetual dictatorship would destroy the old system of yearly magistrates and turn the Senate into a decoration. Others had lost influence under his rule, passed over for honors and nursing grudges. We were patriots, but also wounded aristocrats. It is dangerous when love of country and love of status wear the same face. As for me, I told myself I feared for the Republic, for laws trampled and offices emptied of meaning. But in the quiet hours, I knew I also feared becoming small in a world that revolved around one man. One thing we agreed on: no hired killers. If Caesar was to die, it had to be by senators' hands, in public, as a political act against a man we called a tyrant, not a private murder in an alley. We told ourselves that by staining our own hands, we were keeping our consciences clean. That is the first trick violence plays on idealists. We debated where and when to strike. In the streets, during elections, every plan risked chaos and made it look like a vendetta. In the end, the Senate chamber itself became our chosen stage. There, his guard would be light, and our peers would witness the act. Because the old Senate house in the Forum was being rebuilt, we met instead in the Curia of Pompey, attached to Pompey's theater complex in the Campus Martius. Caesar, victor over Pompey, would die beneath Pompey's name and statue. Rome has a cruel sense of poetry. Caesar planned to leave Rome soon for a campaign in the east. This meeting, just before his departure, was one of his last chances to gather the Senate. On the morning of March 15th, he came with only a modest escort, wrapped in confidence instead of armor. Inside, senators took their seats. We hid short daggers under our togas, pretending to carry petitions. About 200 senators gathered, but only a fraction were conspirators. Closest were Cassius, Brutus, Decimus, Trebonius, Cimber, and the Casca brothers. Every Hail Caesar was a mask. Cimber's role was first. He would approach with a petition to recall his exiled brother, press Caesar, step closer, and create the opening. That would be our signal. He walked up, parchment in hand. Caesar listened, or pretended to. Then he refused. In a sudden movement, Cimber grabbed Caesar's toga at the shoulders and yanked it down, pinning his arms and baring his neck. That was the spark. From behind, Publius Servilius Casca drew his dagger and struck the first blow at Caesar's neck. Shallow, not yet fatal. Caesar twisted, shocked, grabbing Casca's arm as the chamber erupted. Then we moved. From all sides, steel flashed as we pulled our daggers and lunged. Cassius, Decimus, the Casca brothers, and many others struck at close quarters. I remember the crush of bodies, sandals scraping on marble, the sound of blades tearing through cloth and flesh. In the chaos, some of us wounded one another trying to reach him. Caesar tried to rise, to move away, but he was surrounded by the same men who had once stood to applaud him. He staggered toward the steps of the portico area, toward Pompey's statue. There he fell. We continued to stab until he lay still, his blood pooling at the base, splashing the marble legs of Pompey. It is easier to strike at a tyrant than to admit you were killing a man you once respected. Later, the physician Antistius examined the body. He counted about 23 wounds. Most, he said, would not have been fatal alone. Only one deep chest wound was certainly mortal. Caesar died from many blades, and from his blood flooding the floor. We had turned the most powerful man in Rome into a corpse at the feet of his old rival's statue. The Curia, the statue, the floor, all were said to be soaked in blood, an image Rome would never forget. As the last blade pulled back, the spell broke. Many senators not in the plot had fled at the first sign of violence. Others slipped away as soon as they could. We left the Curia together, daggers still stained, telling ourselves and anyone who would listen that we had freed the Republic from a tyrant. We climbed toward the Capitoline Hill, expecting the city to rise with us. It did not. Instead, confusion spread. Ordinary Romans did not know who was dead, who commanded the legions, or what would happen next. Many stayed indoors or left the city, waiting for the next wave of violence. In trying to end fear, we had taught Rome to be afraid again. Mark Antony, Caesar's co-consul and ally, had been kept out of the Curia. Trebonius delayed him outside long enough for us to strike. In the days that followed, Antony moved quickly, securing his position and negotiating between our camp and Caesar's supporters. The Senate tried to balance on a knife edge. They confirmed Caesar's acts, laws, and appointments, and they granted us an amnesty. For a brief moment it seemed we had killed the man but preserved the state. History is often quietest just before it shouts. Then they opened Caesar's will. He had named his great-nephew Gaius Octavius, the youth who would become Octavian, then Augustus, as his principal heir and adopted son. With that, Octavian inherited Caesar's wealth and, more importantly, his name. The will also left money to Roman citizens, reinforcing Caesar's image as a generous benefactor. His funeral in the Forum drew a huge crowd. Antony delivered the oration, reminding the people of Caesar's victories, his generosity, the gifts in his will, and making the wounds and blood vivid. You could feel the mood turn. To the crowd, Caesar was the man who had brought them benefits and glory. We were the men who had murdered him. In our minds, we had sacrificed one life for liberty. In theirs, we had stolen their champion. They built an improvised pyre in the Forum and burned his body. In the unrest that followed, some houses and property of conspirators or allies were attacked. Sympathy swung toward Antony, and soon toward Octavian. We had killed Caesar, but we had not killed the system that made men like Caesar possible. We had struck at the fruit and left the roots untouched. Brutus and Cassius went east, raising troops and preparing to defend themselves and their cause by force. In Rome and the West, Caesar's former allies turned on each other. Antony seemed dominant at first, but Octavian, armed with Caesar's name and inheritance, quickly rose as his rival. Eventually, Antony, Octavian, and Lepidus formed the Second Triumvirate in 43 BC, granted extraordinary powers. They launched proscriptions, lists of enemies whose lives and property were forfeit, and many opponents were killed. At Philippia in 42 BC, the forces of Antony and Octavian defeated those of Brutus and Cassius. Both died by suicide after their defeats. With them, the last organized hope of restoring the old republic died too. Rivalry between Antony and Octavian deepened, especially as Antony's alliance with Cleopatra of Egypt grew closer. The final reckoning came at Actium in 31 BC, where Octavian's fleet defeated the forces of Antony and Cleopatra. Soon after, both were gone, and Octavian stood alone. In 27 BC, he restored authority to the Senate and people, and they granted him the title Augustus. It sounded modest, but it marked the beginning of the Principate, a system that kept republican language while concentrating real power in one man. Caesar had worn his power openly. Augustus learned to hide his crown in legal forms. Caesar himself was deified as Divus Julius, and a temple was built for him in the Forum, near the site of his cremation. Augustus called himself the son of the deified Julius, using Caesar's memory to strengthen his own rule. We had meant to erase a ruler. Instead, we helped turn him into a god. So what did our assassination achieve? We told ourselves we were defending the Republic. We did kill Caesar, but we did not remove the vast commands, the politicized armies, the weakened institutions that had made him possible. We struck down one man and helped create a world where power again settled in a single pair of hands, this time under a new constitutional facade. That is why, when people ask me about the Ides of March, I do not boast. I remember the feel of my dagger hilt, the warmth of blood on marble, the roar of a crowd at a funeral we did not plan. I remember believing, with all my heart, that I was saving Rome. But history is cruel. We did not save the Republic that day. We helped bury it, and in its place, we birthed an empire.